Welcome to Farmers After Hours in our positive self-talk mini session with Adrienne DeSutter from Illinois. Adrienne, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time and your expertise. Go ahead and take over the floor.
All righty, thank you very much, Kate. So my name is Adrienne DeSutter. I am part of an Illinois farm family. I married a fourth generation farmer who grows corn and soybeans, and we also have some hobby cattle. Also expanded our herd at home recently. So we have a 4-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and an almost 1-month-year-old. So we are all about being a full-time farm family here. I stayed home with the kids, and we have a little bit of a unique story in that I am actually a former counselor. And so we've got a little bit of a mental health background in our home as well. So some of what we're doing here is to kind of marry those two topics, mental health and farming. And there's a lot to talk about, a lot we need to know. Our story sort of began, my husband is the young leader chair of Illinois right now. And our story began a couple of years ago in this mental health world when a family friend of ours died by suicide. And as a counselor, I felt a lot of guilt personally, just not being able to anticipate that or see signs. But at the same time, just felt really, really obligated to start sharing more about signs, more about depression and anxiety and suicide prevention. And the more that my husband and I started digging into the statistics, the more we found that it is very prevalent, unfortunately, in the world of agriculture. But the fortunate thing is there's a lot we can do about that. And on a personal note, my husband and I, when we went through this loss, we were also experiencing a lot of stress at home. We had just had our second child and had a lot going on, and really was starting to feel overwhelmed by stress. And we weren't really sure what to do with that. We weren't really sure how we could make a difference in our own home and with others. And at one point we decided, we cannot let our story become tragedy. We cannot let our home become the things that we're seeing in agriculture right now. We can't let it become suicide. We can't let it become in-depth depression and anxiety, because we were on our way and we were starting to dabble in some of those feelings, both my husband and I. And so we decided we had to take control and turn our story around and make it a positive story rather than a tragedy. And the good news is you can do that. We can do that. No matter where you're at in your mental health journey, you can turn it around at any point. And so the last couple of years, we have started making some very positive changes. And one of the things that we have used to do that is positive self-talk, because in agriculture, we live a little bit of an isolated life. And unfortunately, the tractor won't talk back, right? The cattle, they don't talk back. When you're out in the crops, you spend a lot of time by yourself. And since no one else is going to talk back to you, you've got to learn how to talk to yourself in a positive way. So I'm going to give you just a few quick tips on how to do that. And we're going to start off with just acknowledging that stress is okay. And so we're going to approach stress with hope. If I can get the slides to pull up here. Approaching stress with hope. So I'm not sure what the deal is with the share, but I'll try this again. I'll just pull it up like that, and we'll just do it this way. So approach stress with hope. There's two parts to this. Approaching stress in general. When you're talking to yourself, or when you're having thoughts that are stressful thoughts, a lot of times what men do in particular is they try to ignore those thoughts, or they try to just get rid of that or distract themselves with something different. We know that in agriculture, there's a lot of work to be done, right? And so one of the things that people do, and particularly men do on the farm, is when they're dealing with stress, they go find more work to do. And that's okay to a point. But we have to also remember that acknowledging stress is okay. Approaching stress and just recognizing that it's there is okay. We don't always have to try to get rid of it. One of the problems we hear a lot is just be positive, or it's in God's hands, or just think with logic, just use your think happy thoughts. And those things are okay. It's not bad to have those suggestions by any means, but at the same time we have to acknowledge that we don't just have to push stress away. It's okay to just say, I'm stressed right now, and that's okay. It's okay to just acknowledge that that's part of farming, and part of life is that stress is going to happen, and sitting with it is okay sometimes. The second part of this is that we have to do it hopefully, though. We don't want to always be kind of gloom and doom with the attitude of stress. We want to approach it with hope. So a bit of a story for you to help you understand how this works. Last year, during our harvest season, my husband was out, and he was combining, and we got to the point where he was almost done with the field, and rain just started. Torrential rain pouring down. He was right at the end where he only had a couple runs left, and he was really, really frustrated, obviously, because he couldn't close up that field. He had to, they had to go back to it in a couple days. And so when he got home, he walked in the door and was super, super angry. And the first thing I did was I wanted to solve the problem, right? I wanted to approach that stress and with let's get rid of it. Let's make it better. Let's think positively. Let's talk positively to ourselves here, right? And so my husband Drew was talking, and I said, but Drew, you can just go back to it tomorrow, or maybe you should have looked at the weatherman's suggestions, taken their suggestions, and acknowledged that it was going to be a rainy night. And I was giving him all sorts of feedback that was just not working for him, because the thing is, he needed to just be able to sit in that stress for a little bit. He needed to be able to just come home and say, I'm stressed out right now. This sucks. Okay. And what I was doing is I was trying to provide this silver lining, or trying to fix it. And sometimes when we talk to ourselves in stressful moments, we have to stop that. We have to stop giving it a silver lining or trying to fix it, and just say, this is a tough time, and that's okay. So luckily I learned my lesson. And earlier this year, when we were planting, my husband called me from his tractor, and he was really frustrated because it was supposed to rain that day. He was looking forward to coming home, working on some work projects that he got behind on, and it was a 90% chance of rain, and he was not able to come home because it didn't rain. And so here he is on the phone doing the same thing as before, really complaining about the situation, about the rain. And I learned my lesson, and this time I just said, I'm really sorry, Drew. I know that sucks. I'm really sorry that you had an idea of doing things one way, and it's not working out that way. And you know what happened? Within a few minutes of him being able to just kind of release that stress, he said, all right, well, I guess I better get back to it. We'll talk to you later, in a really positive voice. And so it was interesting how just not, trying to fix that problem gave him the opportunity to get out of that stressful time, to get out of that frustration and that anger about the situation, and be able to move on. And so sometimes positive self-talk is, again, just acknowledging that stress is okay, getting through it. You can mumble under your breath for a little bit when you have something going wrong on the farm, and then you just move on, because there's that hopeful piece. We have to make sure we're saying, this is really an awful situation, but I know it's going to get better, right? That's the hopeful piece. We can sit in our anger, or we can sit in our sadness, or whatever it is that's going on with you. That's okay, as long as you're ending that with, okay, but it's going to be fine. I might not like it right now, but I know it's going to be better. Tomorrow might not be a better day, but maybe the next day will. Or maybe this year we're going to lose some money. That's a stressful thing. That's okay to have that thought and that feeling. And as long as we're saying, but I know I'm going to be okay. You may not be farming even. You may be saying, this may be my last year farming, because that's where the situation is right now in our society and in our world and in our industry. We don't know. and I'm not going to promise myself something that's not entirely true, but I am going to say, no matter what happens, I'm going to get through it. I'm going to find some way to make this work and make my life work, whatever that is. So approaching stress with hope is a good start. Also, challenging your negative thoughts is a second tip when it comes to positive self-talk. So even though we're having those negative thoughts, like we're never going to get any rain, right? Those things happen all the time. I know we hear that and we feel that and we think that all the time. We're not going to get this rain. Challenging those negative thoughts is, okay, but you're probably going to get rain at some point, right? So we kind of try to play devil's advocate. When you have a negative thought in your mind, try to play devil's advocate and say, okay, but logically speaking, we're probably going to get a rain, right? Because we usually do. And if you don't, it's okay to challenge your negative thought just by saying, you're going to survive this no matter what. Even if you don't get that rain, even if it's a terrible crop, it's still okay. You're still going to survive. You're going to start next year. You've survived it before, right? We've had crappy years before. And that's what we have to remember is there's, this is a roller coaster industry, right? This profession is up and down all the time. We always have to remember in those lows, we've survived it before and you can survive it again, right? And again, maybe that means you're not going to be farming. Maybe that means you're going to have to sell portions of your farm. Maybe that means you're going to have to do things a little bit differently. I'm not going to just sugarcoat it and act like those aren't possibilities, because they are. But the thing is, as a person and as a life, you are going to survive it. If that's, the attitude that you have is that you've done it before. We're going to challenge those thoughts, play devil's advocate, and you really have to convince yourself of that. And that's what challenging negative thoughts is really convincing yourself, whatever that negative feeling you're having is, how can you convince yourself the opposite, right? Play that game almost. I know in our house, we're really good at being stubborn and arguing. And so for us, that's something now we have to use, in our own mind too, is, okay, well, what would my husband say to me right now if I, came home and tried to complain about this or talk about this? What would my husband say to me right now? Because I know he'd be playing devil's advocate. And just using, someone in your life and having that conversation in your mind is a helpful tool. And you also want to be careful when we're challenging our negative thoughts. That also means not feeling those extremes, like, we're never going to have any rain. Okay, well, really, are you never going to have rain? Because farmers do that. We like to say, this is never going to happen, or this is going to be the worst ever, really making things extreme when we're having our thoughts. And instead of being extreme, it's okay to just say, man, it stinks that we don't have rain today. And I hate that the radar looks like we're not going to get a rain for a little while, but it's okay to just say, we're going to get it eventually, right? And trying to just challenge that mindset. The last thing I think that is really important when it comes to positive self-talk is talking to yourself like you would talk to a loved one. I think it's interesting that we spend a lot of time really bashing ourselves. We spend a lot of time thinking of all the things we've done wrong or are doing wrong. We spend our drive home from the farm thinking of the things that didn't go right. Even when there were 10,000 things that probably went right in our day, we really focus on the things that didn't go right, Not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago, actually, my husband came home one day and he said, I just feel really unproductive. I didn't finish anything. And I know that I share that mentality that if you didn't get something checked off your to-do list, if something isn't complete, whether that's again, getting harvest done in an entire field, or, having your whole planting season done, or, getting that one piece of equipment working perfectly. It doesn't matter what you did throughout the day to show progress. You tell yourself you're not going to be happy, or you're not going to be content when a project is completely done and you can cross it off that list or check it off. And that makes for a lot of time waiting for happiness and waiting for contentment. When we're not paying attention to our progress and celebrating our small successes, that really weighs on us. And so when he came home and he was talking about feeling unproductive, I thought, what can I do here? How can I help the situation? And I was feeding our newborn, who was at the time only a couple weeks old. And I handed him to my husband, Drew, and I said, what would you tell him? What would you tell our son Dax, in 10 years or in 20 years when he's helping you on the farm or he's doing farm work and he comes home and says this? What would you say to him? What advice would you have for him? Would you tell him, you're right, son, you didn't get anything done today, even though you worked 12 hours today out in the heat, you didn't get anything done? Is that what you would do? And of course my husband said, okay, no. Right. But that's the problem with us in society in general, but in particularly in agriculture, is we have that, if we don't get something done, we can't feel good about our day. And we have to remember that, and when it comes to productivity, you're still 12 hours further along than you were yesterday. Doesn't matter if it's done or not. You've still accomplished a lot of small things in that time. And so you have to give yourself the same respect that you would give your child or your wife or your grandfather or whoever, a good friend, and acknowledge that it's okay to 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 have small failures. It's okay to have a day that doesn't go the way you want it to. It doesn't mean you beat yourself up on it. You wouldn't beat up on those other people in your life. What type of advice would you give them? What would you say to them? And turn around and give that to yourself, because we have to give ourselves the same respect that we would give to the loved ones in our lives. And we have to really stop creating this culture in agriculture of being strong and tough as meaning that we're invincible and we're perfect and we're always going to get everything done the right way, because that is silly. We know in agriculture that that is not reality. We're not always going to have things going our way. We know that there are so many things beyond our control that we can't have everything going on, just the way we want them to. So instead of strength being defined as being invincible and being perfect, we need to start shifting to being resilient. We need to teach our kids that resiliency is more important than invincibility. And resiliency is more important than perfection. And we need our fellow farmers to see that as well, that when we're going to meetings, we're not talking about everything going right or everything going wrong. We're just sharing truth, right? And being realistic and creating an image that's more realistic rather than just, you know, everything having to be perfect. It's just not the way it is, right? So that starts with us. That is something that we have to, that changes, that culture in agriculture changes when we decide to change it. And so I challenge you to talk to yourself in these types of ways that are more realistic and setting a good example for your children, for future generations of agriculture to come, because that cycle really starts with you right now and the way that you treat yourself. Let's be a good example in the way we treat ourselves, because that's the way we want our children to grow up and see. So thank you very much for taking time to review these this concept of positive self-talk. And I challenge you to go forth, utilizing some of these as soon as you can.